All righty, we are back here, and I have the awesome Scott Guthrie. How you doing, my friend?
Good, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So now the keynote stuff is over. How are you feeling?
Much more relaxed.
Nice.
It's nice when it's over.
So now that you're all relaxed, we want to make sure we get all of your questions for Scott Guthrie. I can ask him a million questions, but I think I'm more interested in what maybe customers have to say or have
Sure.
questions about. So before the questions come out, let's start with this. What were some of the cool things you talked about during the keynote? Maybe a little recap for everybody.
Yeah, one of the things, I love the Connect event because it's primarily online, although we co-located it with the Dev Intersections conference here in Vegas this year. So it was a nice couple thousand people in the audience as well. But it's a fun event because it's really for developers. And one of the things that we've always tried to do with Connect has been really show, don't tell, and really show a lot of demos live that really kind of highlight some of the great opportunities for developers that exist now in the world. And so we did a lot about Visual Studio, some fantastic VS Code demos. We announced and previewed for the first time VS 2019 and showed off all the great improvements that we're doing in terms of our mainline IDE. We talked about .NET Core and .NET Core 3 in particular. Some exciting announcements around the open sourcing of WPF, WinForms, as well as the Windows XAML UI layer. Just tons of improvements in terms of this core development workflows, whether it's around IntelliCode, which is AI-driven IntelliSense, whether it's around LiveShare for better collaboration. We showed off for the first time at a Microsoft event some of our GitHub work that we're doing now that GitHub is part of Microsoft. And highlighted actions, highlighted some of the new CI/CD tooling that you can now take advantage of with any GitHub repo, whether it's for Windows, Mac, or Linux. We showed off a whole bunch of the great work that's happening in Azure, whether it's the latest improvements with Cosmos DB, whether it's our new AKS offering, which is our Azure Kubernetes service, where we announced a brand new serverless option that lets you kind of serverlessly scale Kubernetes, which is the first of any cloud vendor to do so. We showed off a bunch of great improvements in our AI stack that you helped demo, amongst others. And we also announced the general availability of our Azure ML service, which enables you to train and build models at scale. And then, one of the things that we did that we've always tried to do with Connect and increasing at other events is just show off the openness of Microsoft. Which is a big change from where we were a couple years ago.
Right.
And so, the very first demo we did was a 15-minute demo that was primarily on a Mac, doing Node and Python inside VS Code, but showing how you can use VS Code, you can use Azure, you can take advantage of every open source library and build a great solution. And, that's something that throughout the day that we're really emphasizing is how do we basically provide the tools in the cloud platform for every developer and to enable every developer to use the best tools for the job. And hopefully it's a fun event and people really liked it.
And that's awesome too, because I just saw Scott Hanselman also show a similar demo, but he was on Ubuntu and someone else was on a Windows machine.
Yeah.
All right, so for those that are new to Azure, what's like the high level pitch of you should try this out? What would you say to them?
Well, I think the thing that makes Azure pretty special is just the wealth of services that we now have. And so, since probably a lot of developers are watching this show, specifically for developers, whether it's our Azure App Service, which is probably the easiest and fastest and best way to build and host web apps in the cloud, and which supports Windows, Linux, and containers as the deployment package, whether it's our Azure Functions, which allow you to run serverless code, whether it's, again, our Azure Kubernetes service, whether it's our Cosmos DB service, which lets you have a multi-master write database deployed all over the world with single-digit millisecond response time guaranteed in an SLA, or whether it's some of our AI services. There's just a lot of really, really rich services that we now support. And then I think one thing that people that look at Azure often say we're very differentiated around is the developer tooling that we have inside Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, and then the management tooling with our portal. That just means that instead of just using these services as standalone Lego blocks, we help guide people a little bit more to actually build solutions successfully with them. And again, if you look at the keynote that I did today, and then the keynote that Scott Hanselman just finished, it's rather than just claim that, we're really showing it
Right.
over and over again in demos. And, I think that's something that people are increasingly giving us credit for, is just the wealth of our development tools that are now work with every language and on every platform, married with that cloud platform is a really powerful 1-2 combination. And then for enterprises, we have a very unique story around hybrid computing. For people that are doing IoT and or edge-based scenarios, I think our Azure IoT services are very differentiated. We're seeing some really great results with some of our AI capability, in particular on speech and image recognition, that are very differentiated versus, say, AWS or other cloud providers. And you'll see us continue to really push hard on, really enabling people to be more successful. And ultimately, customer success is really, I think, the top measure that we aspire for.
Cool. All right, so questions are coming in. By the way, we want your questions. I have 1,000 questions that I could ask, but I'd rather ask your questions. The first is, are there any plans to bring the new GitHub PR integration into VS 2019? For example, the code review features for Azure DevOps.
Yeah, so I mean, the nice thing is, and we showed it this morning, both in VS Code and VS 2019, both now have native GitHub integration. And so, yeah, you can do pull requests directly inside the IDE. You can do code reviews directly inside the IDE. We even, with VS 2019, when you first launched the tool, instead of just launching into a blank IDE, the opening dialog even has the ability for you to select any Git repo or any GitHub repository, paste it in, boom, you're just in. And so, yeah, we're definitely trying to make that Git and specifically GitHub integration super first class, and I think you'll be pretty happy with what you see in it.
And that's cool. By the way, if you're not using source control, please do. I've lost like weeks worth of work because I didn't do that. And it's cool that we have all these tooling to help people do that as the default, which is kind of nice. All right, next question. Any plans for PowerShell support in the IntelliCode functionality in VS Code and VS 2019?
It's a good question. I don't know where, I have to confess, I don't know if we have IntelliSense support with PowerShell yet. But if we do, then I think the IntelliCode support would be pretty easy for us to enable.
Right.
So yeah, it's great feedback, and it's definitely something we should follow up on. I know we do have IntelliCode support now for .NET, Java, Python, Node, TypeScript, JavaScript, and C++.
Which is a lot. I mean, I just saw basically the IntelliCode, Francesca did a demo where there was IntelliCode on TensorFlow, and I was like, holy cow, that's amazing. Okay, next question. Are there any plans with Azure Stack to bring Office 365 or any other SAS service over to it?
We're certainly adding more and more things to Azure Stack. And so, expect to see more of our first-party services run on it going forward. We haven't really announced anything specific with Office 365, but we are definitely doing work to add more and more functionality on top of Azure Stack. And pretty much every 6 months, you see more services show up on Azure Stack. And we see just a ton of excitement and energy around it. So it certainly could be possible in the future.
So there's some more GitHub questions, but before we go there, I wanted to see if I could clarify. Microsoft bought GitHub, but GitHub is its own thing. Is that right? I mean, how would you explain the relationship there between GitHub and Microsoft? Because I know Nat gets a lot of questions about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're super excited to have GitHub be part of the overall Microsoft family. And I've always been tremendously impressed with the work that GitHub's doing.
Of course.
I think, anytime you have an amazing company like GitHub, you want to make sure that, and especially one that has a real responsibility as being a community for developers of all platforms, you want to be very careful with how you manage it. And that's why, we've decided to keep it as independently run. And so Nat works for Microsoft, he works for me, but he's the CEO of GitHub, and we have sort of kept the GitHub structure independent from the rest of Microsoft, similar to what we've done with LinkedIn. And that's partly because we want to make sure that they maintain that independence, and that we're a good steward of the broader open source community, and making sure that people recognize that independence and recognize the fact that GitHub's going to support every platform, it's going to support every cloud, it's going to support every device. And so it is part of Microsoft, but at the same time, you'll still see it kind of managed separately, similar to what LinkedIn has been, and it's worked very well for us with LinkedIn.
Awesome.
And yeah, our top goal is really take care of developers that are on GitHub today, to grow the GitHub business and help support them. And I think we're off to a good start, and I think Nat's doing a great job. And customers are already noticing, wow, GitHub's getting a lot of feature enhancements
Right.
that have been asked for a long time, just in the month since it's actually been part of Microsoft. And we're spending a lot of time on making sure that that again we do a great job, and that we are super responsible in terms of taking care of that community, which is an incredibly powerful, vibrant community.
Yeah, and so I wanted to couch that because we're getting some GitHub questions, and I felt like maybe there should be a clarification. That's awesome. Are there any plans to partner with GitHub and add Roslyn-based support for code navigation? For example, click to jump between classes, methods, etc., for the major languages.
It's a great feature request, and I think you will see. The nice thing we have now, both with the Visual Studio family of tools, so both VS Code, which is built on Electron, which is originally built by GitHub, and obviously the full VS is, we do have very rich language services and just a ton of wealth in the IDE. And then GitHub obviously has a ton of wealth as well. And so in terms of capabilities and richness. And so you are definitely going to start to see more and more fusion of those capabilities, so that if there's unique things like code navigation that we have in VS, how can GitHub optionally, if they think it makes sense, take advantage of it? And then even today, you saw a lot of how we're taking the richness of GitHub and the community and the collaboration, and making those extensions inside VS and VS Code optional. We're never going to force people to use either side, but we do think there's huge opportunity to make that experience even tighter. And yeah, I'm excited what we've already done, and stay tuned for more things like code navigation and other things in the future.
Awesome. Here's the next question. Should SSRS or reporting solely be migrating toward Power BI, or are there improvements coming for SSRS that won't be provided with Power BI in the future? That's a really specific question.
Yeah, so SSRS, we don't know, are SQL Server reporting services. And it's a super popular way that you can go ahead and create reports. Often sort of think of as printed tabular reports, where people want very fine-grained levels of customization. Where Power BI has historically been more around data visualization, and so you can think of it as charts and graphs, versus SSRS sometimes is used for kind of much more tabular reports. They're built by the same team, and so you are seeing more and more integration between the two. And so I do think you'll start to see that SSRS functionality natively provided inside Power BI, but we'll continue to have SSRS as a separate product as well.
Cool.
And there's a super vibrant community, but we want to make sure that community can also, if they want to, publish using Power BI and take advantage of that as a cloud service as well.
Cool. All right, more questions. Azure is a great platform, but as an individual, it can be difficult to test complex scenarios without spending, and they put $3 signs, which I believe on Groupon means it's going to cost a little bit. Are there any changes on the horizon that have a cheaper dev layer for very basic testing?
Yeah, we do a couple things. I mean, it's a great question. One thing we are trying to do is make sure for all of the different services we provide, how do we have entry-level tiers? And so, for example, even with like Cosmos DB, historically people would say, I love Cosmos DB and the capabilities, but I don't want to spend $200 to, for a low-volume site or do testing. One of the things I announced in the keynote today is sort of a $24 a month option. That's if you run it all month. And we also now have kind of free 30-day trial editions that you can take advantage of. And so we are definitely looking at how do we make all of our services available in a more entry-level way, which helps both with just exploring and using, but also certainly helps on the testing. We then do also have MSDN. And so if you are an MSDN subscriber, we do give you free Azure credits each month. And those can be up to $150 of free Azure credits that are particularly useful for testing and for dev test purposes. And so that's another mechanism that we're providing, in addition to kind of lowering the costs, is just to also give people free credits that they can use as part of their development process. And so if you haven't checked that out, I definitely recommend. But every MSDN subscriber, whether you're pro or whether you're enterprise, comes with these built-in credits, and they can save you a bunch of money.
Yeah, I know that a lot of the demos that I build use the built-in credits because as an employee, I get one of the subscriptions, and I've never gone over quota. I might have gone over on some of the internal ones. Don't tell anyone, Scott.
Okay.
Just FYI. All right, any plans to have Mac OS VMs in Azure? Related question, I can use Mac OS Build Agent in Azure DevOps. Does it need to run in Azure or some other way?
Yeah, for the build agent that we use for Azure DevOps, so one of the nice things with Azure DevOps is it supports doing CI/CD, whether it's through the Azure DevOps code repository or now through GitHub. You can kick off a build every time a pull request or check-in happens. And we support Windows, Mac, and Linux as build agents. And so the question here, first of all, is the Mac builds are actually done with Macs that are racked in the data center for that build DevOps. And it's not only so you can do Mac applications, but for iOS applications, you need to compile them on a Mac, because the tool chain only works on a Mac. And so probably the most common use case for that is actually for building iOS apps. We don't right now support kind of virtualized Macs that you can rent by the hour. Instead, they basically run in just that DevOps configuration. It's a little tricky managing Macs in that type of environment, which is partly why we haven't general purpose the virtualization layer yet. But it's good feedback and something I'm sure we'll keep looking at.
Awesome. This is a more serious question. What is the HTML color for Scott's shirt?
Embarrassed to say, I don't know.
FF0000, right? RGB? FF0.
I'm not sure if it's perfect red or at some point there's probably some color app we can use.
Did you just one day wear a red shirt and now you have to wear it all the time? Is that what happened?
Pretty much, yeah. I gave a talk in 2007 at one of the Mix conferences that went well, and I was wearing a red shirt. And I just thought it was a lucky shirt. And so the next year I gave another keynote and I said, oh, this shirt worked last time.
Yeah.
And so I wore it again. And it became a bit of a tradition. And now if I don't wear a red shirt,
they think you're sick or something.
Or people yell at me, and I get tons of abuse on Twitter. Not serious abuse, but people are like, don't pay attention to anything I say. They just ask me why I'm not wearing the red shirt. So now I feel like I have to wear the red shirt every time I present.
I'll be honest. I've been in meetings where you've walked in without a red shirt, and I was like, where did they put Scott, and who is this imposter? But then you started talking.
I don't wear it every day, but I probably wear it at least 2 times a week. And then
really?
I wear it for every talk I give.
If I wore the same shirt, my wife would be like, "Hey, look, get out. Gotta buy it."
I do have like 15 or 20 of these.
You really do?
Red shirts. Yeah. I don't wear the same shirt. I mean, I do wash it. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's important. All right, next question. With VS19, are there plans to be able to offload some of the work it does to background tasks or completely separate threads for large solutions, which will get stuck or take an extremely long time?
There's a lot of work that we've done pretty much with every release of VS to do a couple different things. One is we're making more and more Visual Studio out of process. So I remember when I first started working in Visual Studio, everything ran in one giant process because back then processes were more expensive.
Right.
And I distinctly remember sometime about 10 or 15 years ago where we just ran out of address space.
Oh no.
In that process because we just had so much address space loaded of different libraries and things like that. And so we've steadily moved things out of process. So it's sort of like a background task. You can think of it. It's less of necessarily a thread, but how do we basically isolate the processes, which has helped for a bunch of things. And so some of the compiler services, some of the language services, some of the Azure tooling now runs out of process. And the benefit there is it does enable VS to get even more fast and responsive and scale, especially to take advantage of more processors. And so, yeah, you'll see that even in VS 2019, we've done that more. And solution load time is a key area that we've invested in, specifically with VS 2019. And hopefully try out the preview and give us feedback, but you should see it load much, much faster.
It looked pretty zippy when Scott did it. Another important question. If you do well at Microsoft, do you have to change your name to Scott?
If you do really well, you do.
Yeah, oh, of course.
Yeah,
okay, well,
no.
At least my name has 4 letters, so I'm working on it. Next question, what is the best IDE for .NET development on Linux?
The best IDE for .NET development on Linux? Probably VS Code at this point. Yeah, I mean, VS Code is, and we showed it in the keynotes, VS Code is pretty amazing in terms of just seeing the adoption and groundswell of it.
Yeah.
Both for .NET, but impressively for non.NET. And I think at this point, VS Code is probably now, for non.NET developers, the most commonly used development tool on the planet.
Which is, that happened really fast. Did you just wake up one morning and someone said, hey, here's your newspaper, and also here's some news on VS Code? I mean, how did it happen so fast?
The team's built a great product.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we introduced it about 3 years ago.
At a Connect.
At a Connect,
yeah.
And it might have been Connect 3 years ago. And so it's been awesome just to see every year it's gotten richer and richer and better, and really kept that core code-focused ethos. And what's great is it works on Windows, it works on Linux, it works on a Mac.
And it has a really nice ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a great ecosystem, monthly releases, and I think it's the #1 followed project in all of GitHub. And that was before we bought GitHub.
Nice.
So it wasn't something that we arbitrarily
So we're not
did.
cheating. We're not
boosting. Cheating. Yeah.
We don't boost scores, by the way. They run their own stuff over there.
But even if you look not just at Microsoft conferences, but Amazon had their conference last week, and they highlighted VS Code in one of their keynotes, and Google ends up using VS Code in their keynotes. So it's great to see, and it's not like we're sponsoring either Amazon or Google. But it's great to see, developers want to use great tools, and it's awesome to see everyone's adopting VS Code and VS.
Awesome. Next question, how will the Azure API Management Consumption Plan compare to the standard plan? Azure API Management Consumption Plan.
You might have stumped me on that one.
I don't know what that service is.
I think it's a new billing model that you can use, which is actually purely consumption driven. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think this feedback's coming from people have loved our API management service, and we've seen a whole bunch of enterprises adopt it and had a lot of success with it. But the entry level for that plan, if I remember, started at a couple $100 a month for the standard plan. And I think this new consumption plan now gives you a much lower entry, kind of similar to that question we had a couple ago about helping with testing and things like that. And it's great for lower volume use cases where you don't want to have to start off by paying a couple $100 a month. If you're a large enterprise and you're doing billions of API calls per month, you're probably just going to stick with the existing plan, the standard plan you have. But that consumptive plan is very good for very elastic cases, and particularly good for people that are just getting started and don't want to have to pay up front for something that they're not going to fully use.
Right. That's amazing. All right, next question. Was VS Code written from the ground up, or did it use Studio as a base?
It's a little bit of both. The VS Code editor was written from the ground up. So the core development tool was all written from the ground up. Having said that, we have leveraged things like Roslyn, which is our language service, the debugging, some of the debugging engine hooks inside VS, and several of the other services. Those places we've reused some code, and we built them in such a way that we just have one team build one module, and it can be used inside both the VS IDE and VS Code.
Right.
So we don't have two separate teams building the same thing. But the core VS Code itself was written from the ground up.
Yeah, and I'm starting to remember now, because I had Eric Gama on at a Connect, where he explained like Roslyn is running out of process in this thing called OmniSharp, and when you build extensions, that's why it's so zippy. Everything's running somewhere else, so you're getting really good experience.
I mean, the nice thing about the Roslyn or the VS Code architecture, and this is again what we're also doing inside VS now, is because you can run extensions out of process. It also just means that extensions tend not to conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Or frankly, more specifically, when an extension screws up, it's really easy to identify which extension. And I think we've seen other development tools, and even VS historically in the past, you get one extension that slows everything down, and it kind of gives everyone a bad rap, and developers aren't sure why something is slow. And that out-of-process model helps versioning, it helps reliability, and it also really, frankly, helps from a performance perspective, both be fast, but also identify which extension is not fast if you're having a performance problem.
Yeah, and I've had extensions crash, and it says, "Oh, hey, this extension crashed. Do you want to restart it?" I mean, It's very subtle, but it's also very nice, as opposed to years ago in Visual Studio when an extension went rogue. It's like, why is Visual Studio taking 40 gigs of memory? You know, and it's not Visual Studio, it's something else generally. All right, next question. When are you planning to release Visual Studio 2019? Everyone always asks this question, and then the standard answer will come out almost every time.
Standard answer probably when it's ready, right?
Yeah,
Or something.
that's right.
My guess is it'll be in 2019. I don't know if we have an exact date. I mean, we are trying to be quality driven. You know, today is the first preview.
Right.
And so, you know, we're going to be looking obviously closely at feedback, but, you know.
We usually go through 4 at least. I've seen 4 like versions of a preview at the last. I think that was the last Visual Studio.
Maybe the last. It depends on the release. And then the other thing that's changed quite a bit has been, you know, we're much more agile so that even like, for example, when VS 2017 shipped, we would do kind of quarterly major updates.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I think we did 4 or 5 or 6 major updates with VS 2017. And so, you know, that also means that there's not like a hard date when we have to say like everything is done. You know, instead we can be very quality driven,
right, and
release on that date the features that are ready, and then know, hey, the next quarter we come out with more features when they're ready. And you know, I think that ability to have both predictable releases, but also maintain the high quality and be very agile, you know, I think that is something we certainly hear resonate very well with developers.
That's cool. I mean, I do a lot of my work in VS Code now because I do a lot of Python stuff, and every once in a while I open Visual Studio and there's always like an update, which is pretty cool. It shows how agile we are in updating these things. All right, next question. Are there now any plans to port WPF to other OSs other than Windows now that WPF, et cetera, are open source? Are we planning on moving like WinForms and WPF to work on Linux, for example, or Mac?
We're not right now, at least at Microsoft, porting those libraries to other OSs. We do have obviously Xamarin, and that is designed to be portable. And Xamarin does support the same XAML standard that WPF supports. Yeah, having said that, now that these languages are open source, or these frameworks are open source, you know, we are going to have people that are going to be contributing. One of the first contributions we took, even in the keynote this morning, and he'd been working on it for a couple weeks because he knew about the announcement coming. But the pull request was extending the, you know, some of the theming support back to Vista and older operating systems, and that was an accepted check-in. So, you know, I do think you will see people take, now that it's open source, there'll be more of that technology that will become more available elsewhere because it is open source. And then Xamarin, we are investing in as probably the biggest area for how we're enabling cross-platform UX.
Cool, cool. All right, next question. When will Blazor become a product? I missed this announcement.
I believe we are effectively making it a product today. .NET Core 3 has the Razor composable components.
Is that what it's called?
No, I think I made that.
Yeah.
It's Razor composable UI, I think. But it's basically our single page application mechanism for how you can build single page apps in a browser all in C#. And so I think that is the technology that was Blazor, you know, with a new name. So I think that is part of .NET Core 3 Preview 1 today.
Okay, so you should download it and take a look. Next question, will Visual Studio 2019 be able to integrate with your own in-house Git repository, or is it limited to GitHub only?
No, VS 2019 has Git tooling that works with any Git repository, including your in-house repos. Now, some of the pull request integration is specific to GitHub, since standard Git doesn't sort of have, you know, GitHub has really popularized that kind of PR concept. But the core source control, Git lens, version control management, that's all built into VS 2019. It'll work with any Git backend.
Okay, so it's not just a GitHub thing, it's all Git will work.
Correct, yep.
All right, so I have a couple of questions. By the way, keep the questions coming. I love them. The first one is, many organizations are struggling to find ways to integrate AI into their applications. What are some suggestions that you have for easy starters for them?
One of the things that we showed in the keynote this morning is our Azure Cognitive Services, which is one of the easiest ways to start with AI. And we have a whole bunch of pre-built components that do speech to text, video transcription, sentiment analysis, and more. And that's one way you can add some pretty strong richness. And then Seth here did a demo showing using those cognitive services with our Azure search service. And so you can literally just dump a directory of files, whether they're images, videos, PDFs, and it will search index using AI, all that content. So that's a pretty easy way to get started. The other thing I'd recommend if you're a .NET developer is to check out the ML.NET library, which is a .NET library that, again, enables you to take advantage of a bunch of pre-built ML algorithms that you can apply just on standard .NET data structures.
Yep.
And that's a really easy way that you can effectively operationalize models inside any .NET app that you've written. And then we have more advanced tooling with our Azure Machine Learning service, with our Jupyter Notebook service we call Azure Notebooks, and our Azure Databricks offering that let you do fully custom AI. But I'd recommend starting with cognitive services or ML.NET if you're just looking to kind of get going and you aren't a data scientist, you don't understand the statistical background behind ML or AI, but at the same time you want to do something cool.
Yeah, just think of it as like a framework and call it.
Yep.
And I believe a lot of the services have like free 40,000 call. I don't know what the number is, but you have a free set of calls that you can do.
Yep.
And then the other thing that I saw, and maybe you can mention this a little bit, my understanding is there's a way to take cognitive services and lift and shift them down. And tell us about that.
Well, what you can do with cognitive services now is you can run them in the cloud as a service where we give you an API.
Right.
But then we also allow you to package up a cognitive service as a container.
Right.
And so you can basically take the container and run it on your local Kubernetes cluster or any Docker-enabled host that you have. And so that really gives you the flexibility to use our cognitive services anywhere. And if you use our tools to build AI models, you can also package them up as a container and run them anywhere as well. And so, there's very powerful apps that people are building where, for example, let's say they have a local camera.
Yeah.
They want to do face detection or computer vision, and if you've got 40 frames per second or 60 frames per second, taking a picture, uploading the cloud, and doing reasoning on it, the latency and the bandwidth needed is just not practical. If you can run that AI model doing computer vision on the device, you can do that in real time and save yourself a bunch of money and have very fast latency and not have to have any bandwidth going back and forth to the cloud. And so, we're seeing a lot of people starting to take advantage of this containerization approach. And it's something today that's unique to Azure. The other cloud vendors sort of want you to run using only their AI services. And while we enable you to do that too with Azure, we think this container flexibility is a real differentiator for us.
It's pretty amazing though. I mean, especially with computer vision, sending pictures up to the cloud and then waiting for something back when it's happening real time is not good. And my understanding is we don't, like if you're running that in a container locally, we don't send any of those pictures up to Azure ever.
Yep.
So if you're working like in an environment like a hospital or a lawyer's office where the data needs to stay there, no worries. All we send back is how many times you called it.
Yeah. The nice thing is it's great both from a performance perspective and from a cost perspective because you're not paying for bandwidth and you get that lightning fast performance. But as you mentioned, it's great from a security and from a privacy perspective, because you don't have to worry about these pictures are going somewhere you don't know. You have complete control over it, and you can even sort of make the guarantee to say if you're a retailer, for a customer that's entering your store, the data, their picture never leaves the store.
Yeah,
which is a nice, in this day and age where we're all worried more and more about privacy, is a really nice promise to be able to make.
And the other thing is, and this is super important, is at Microsoft, we don't use any of our customers' data to build these cognitive services models, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one big difference of our business model versus someone's business model that might be more ad-centric is, we make a very firm promise to our customers, which is their data is their data, and we don't look at their data and we don't use their data to try to monetize our own business.
Awesome. All right, a couple questions. What about Angular support in .NET Core 2.2? Will we see a good template with full working Angular CLI?
I We might have that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
To confess, that one I don't know off the top of my head.
Cool. That's a very specific version. I know there's Angular templates when you run Visual Studio, but I don't know if that specific version has one. If it does, great. If it doesn't, let us know. Happy to. All right, AKS, Azure Kubernetes dev spaces are great, but it is planned. Okay, is it planned for support developed with local Docker for Windows with Kubernetes?
Yeah, the thing, one of the things we're trying to do with AKS, and Jeff Holland did a great demo in my keynote. So AKS is our Azure Kubernetes service. Is how do you enable Kubernetes-based development and make it very fast and fluid? And a challenge is, as you move to microservices and containers, increasingly you've got a solution that might have 25 or 100 projects in it, with each project mapping to a container. And that experience when you press F5 on a local instance, go get coffee and come back as it's booting up. And if you've got an app that is designed to run on a 8-core, 12 gigabyte system, your laptop is just not going to be fast and fluid.
Right.
And so that's partly why we did this AKS offering, which gives you a way that you can actually do your Kubernetes development locally, but run and debug remotely. And that way you just spin up AKS cluster in the cloud, and on your local laptop, you can be connected and you can make a change at F5. It just recompiles the container in question. It doesn't have to rebuild or recompile or relaunch everything else.
Right.
And you got this very fast, fluid experience that feels, frankly, like what you're used to from a development perspective over the last 20 years. And another nice thing then is you can have multiple developers sharing the same cluster, so that you have like one dev team environment and you might have 25 developers, and they can each see their slightly different slice as they're debugging individual components, but sharing resources. So it's great from that perspective. I think we might at some point enable dev spaces with Azure Stack locally, but it's, if you just want to run locally, you can use the standard Kubernetes tooling to do that. And so we do support that in VS.
Right.
But the real magic with dev spaces is this ability to leverage a remote shared cluster to enable kind of much faster developer workflows.
Cool. All right, so we have a couple more questions and we're running out of time, so we're going to go through these really fast. Are you seeing trends for devs to be specialists versus generalists? Is it becoming impossible to know enough about all Azure offerings to be fluent in everything?
It's a good question, man. I think the thing I'd recommend to people is be a generalist enough to know how all the pieces fit together.
Right.
This is true whether it's with Azure, with say .NET, or with other technologies of just, what is a NoSQL database? What is a relational database? What are the pros and cons of each?
Right.
And what are the raw capabilities? And then I'd pick a couple areas to go and become a specialist in.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, if you're just sort of an inch deep in 1,000 things, that might not be enough to do anything super well. But if you can at least understand broadly and then go deep on a specific area, that would be my kind of recommendation from a career perspective.
Awesome.
Whether it's with Azure or anything else.
Yeah, all I know is that when I start Azure, like every couple of weeks, I see a new thing and I'm like, oh man, I barely am starting to understand the things that I know. And so it's pretty good. So just to finish out, we have about 90 seconds. What are some recent developments inside Microsoft you're personally most excited about?
It's tough. It's like asking, which is your favorite child?
Yeah.
I think, rather than talking about individual services, there's lots of products and services that I'm very excited about. Whether it's in Azure, whether it's in Dynamics, whether it's in Power BI, whether it's in Visual Studio, in .NET. There's tons there that I'm excited about. I think the part I'm more excited about is just sort of the openness and of how Microsoft's changed, and the fact that a lot of my announcements this morning weren't just that you can use open source with Microsoft tools. These are things that we've actually contributed back to the open source community, whether it's VS Code, whether it's a lot of the Kubernetes work with virtual kubelets, as well as some of the cloud native application bundling work that we announced today. And just the number of Microsoft teams and engineers that are now major contributors to open source.
Right.
We'll have more than 5,000 Microsoft engineers that will make code contributions to open source projects this year alone. And like that openness is a real change, and it is both helping us contribute better in terms of a broader range of developer communities, and it's helping us also take great ideas and make our products better. And so I do think it's something that from a long-term perspective is going to be great for everyone.
Awesome. So you have like a last-minute pitch for Azure. What do you want to say to developers about Azure and how they should get started?
Well, if you missed my keynote this morning, please go watch it. Whether it's around Azure or around developers. I mean, the first half of the keynote was primarily actually just around development and a lot of the tooling work that we're doing. But it's, I'm a big believer in show, don't tell.
Right.
And so if you just watch, forget the keynote speaker. He was
okay,
but
really good demos.
But the demos were very good.
Yeah, so good.
And it's nice that everything we showed you can now download and use today. And really look forward to seeing what you build with it.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for our next guest. Thanks so much for being with us. Scott, we actually have Brendan Burns over there to explain Kubernetes to all of us.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time.